You thought you knew about prophecy. A priest-turned-prophet stands by an ancient river when reality itself bends, wheels spinning within wheels. Creatures with faces that should never exist together, and a throne of fire that burns with the very presence of God. But this is only the beginning. Ezekiel will be commanded to do the impossible, to lie paralyzed for 390 days. To shave his head with a sword, to eat bread baked over fire that symbolizes defilement. He'll dig through walls and discover the darkest secrets hidden in the temple's shadows, elders worshipping demons in the darkness, women weeping for foreign gods, priests turning their backs on the Almighty to bow before the sun. Then he'll witness something that will make your blood run cold. The glory of God, the very presence that filled Solomon's temple, slowly, deliberately, tragically departing from Jerusalem. But when all hope seems lost, when Israel lies scattered like dry bones in a forsaken valley, Ezekiel will prophesy the impossible. The bones will rattle, flesh will form, and breath will return. This is prophecy at its most visceral, most terrifying, and most hope-filled. Welcome to Ezekiel's world. It was the 30th year, in the 4th month on the 5th day, and Ezekiel was among the exiles by the Kebar River in Babylon. The skies above him suddenly opened, and he saw visions of God. This was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's exile, and on that exact day the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, by the Kebar River, in the land of the Babylonians. The hand of the Lord was on him there. Ezekiel was a priest, which meant he should have been serving in the temple in Jerusalem. He should have been offering sacrifices, leading worship, and standing in the presence of God in the holy place. But instead, he was here in Babylon, hundreds of miles from home, living among the exiles. The Kebar River wasn't the Jordan. Babylon wasn't Jerusalem. Everything about his current situation was wrong, a constant reminder that his people had been torn from their land and scattered among foreign nations. He was 30 years old, the age when priests traditionally began their service in the temple, but there was no temple service for him. No altar to tend, no sacrifices to offer, just the muddy banks of a foreign river and the daily reality of exile. The dreams he had as a young man, studying to be a priest, were gone. His future looked nothing like what he had imagined. All the years of preparation, all the knowledge of temple rituals and sacrificial procedures, none of it mattered now because the temple was far away in Jerusalem and he was stuck in Babylon. Then Ezekiel looked up and saw something coming from the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal. This wasn't just any storm. It was violent, powerful, and moving straight toward him. The wind whipped around the cloud as fire flashed continuously within it. Everything about this moment screamed supernatural. This wasn't weather. This was the arrival of something beyond human understanding. The light surrounding the cloud was so bright, it seemed to push back the darkness itself. The flashing lightning wasn't random, it moved with purpose, as if the storm itself was alive and conscious. And at the very heart of it all, there was this strange glowing metal that seemed to burn with a fire that didn't consume. It pulsed with energy and life, getting closer with every passing second. Ezekiel couldn't look away, he couldn't run. All he could do was stand there and watch as heaven itself came crashing toward him. From the center of that glowing metal came 4 living creatures. Their appearance was strange and powerful. Each one looked like a human, but that's where the similarity ended. Each creature had 4 faces and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and their feet were like the feet of a calf, gleaming like polished bronze. The bronze caught the light from the fire and reflected it in all directions, making it impossible to look directly at their feet without being overwhelmed by the brightness. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands. All 4 of them had faces and wings, and the wings of one touched the wings of another. Each one went straight ahead without turning as they moved. They didn't need to turn, they didn't need to pivot or adjust their direction. They simply moved forward with absolute precision and purpose, as if they knew exactly where they were going, and nothing could stop them or slow them down. Now here's where it gets even stranger. Their faces looked like this. Each of the four had the face of a human in front, the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle at the back. These weren't masks or decorations. These were actual faces, each one representing something powerful and distinct. The human face spoke of intelligence and relationship. The lion represented strength and royalty. The ox symbolized service and sacrifice. The eagle showed swiftness and transcendence. Each creature was a combination of all these qualities at once. Their wings were spread out upward, each having two wings that touched the wing of another creature on either side, and two wings covering their bodies. When you looked at them together, their wings formed a kind of canopy, connected to each other, moving as one unified presence. Each one went straight ahead, moving wherever the spirit wanted them to go, without turning as they moved. There was no hesitation, no confusion, no debate about which direction to take. The spirit moved, and they moved. It was that simple. The appearance of these living creatures was like burning coals of fire, or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures, bright and powerful, with lightning flashing out of it. The creatures themselves darted back and forth like flashes of lightning, moving with incredible speed and purpose. One moment they were in one position, the next they had moved somewhere else entirely. It happened so fast that human eyes could barely track their movement. Everything about them radiated power and holiness. As Ezekiel looked at the living creatures, he saw something on the ground beside each of the four-faced creatures. A wheel. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like sparkling topaz, and all four looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel intersecting a wheel. It wasn't just a wheel lying flat on the ground. It was a wheel standing upright, with another wheel passing through it at a right angle, creating a structure that could move in any direction instantly without needing to turn. As they moved, they would go in any one of the four directions the creatures faced, without turning as they moved. The wheels could go forward, backward, left or right without pivoting. Think about that for a moment. Normal wheels need to turn to change direction. A cart has to be steered. A chariot needs to be maneuvered. But these wheels didn't. They simply moved in whatever direction was needed without any adjustment. It defied everything anyone knew about how movement worked. Their rims were high and awesome, and all four rims were full of eyes all around. Hundreds of eyes, maybe thousands. Each eye was watching, observing, seeing everything in every direction at once. Nothing was hidden from their sight. Nothing escaped their attention. Every movement, every detail, every secret thing was visible to these eyes that covered the rims of the wheels. When the living creatures moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the living creatures rose from the ground, the wheels also rose. There was no mechanism connecting them, no gears or chains or axles. The wheels simply responded to the creatures as if they shared the same life force. Wherever the spirit wanted to go, they would go, and the wheels would rise along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When the creatures moved, the wheels moved. When the creatures stood still, the wheels stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheels rose along with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Ezekiel saw this pattern repeat over and over. Every movement was perfectly synchronized. Every action was coordinated with absolute precision. The wheels weren't following the creatures. They were moving with them, as part of them, controlled by the same spirit that controlled everything else in this vision. Spread out above the heads of the living creatures was what looked something like an expanse, sparkling like crystal and awesome in its appearance. The expanse stretched over them like a dome or ceiling, but it wasn't solid like stone or metal. It sparkled and shimmered, catching and reflecting light in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. The crystal-like surface seemed to be both transparent and reflective at the same time, creating an effect that human words struggled to capture adequately. Under the expanse, their wings were stretched out one toward the other, and each had two wings covering its body. When the creatures moved, Ezekiel heard the sound of their wings, like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the tumult of an army. It wasn't a gentle sound. It was powerful, overwhelming, filling the air with a noise that made everything else disappear. Imagine standing next to a massive waterfall where the sound is so loud you can feel it in your chest. That's what the wings sounded like when they moved. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. And when the wings lowered, the sound stopped. The silence that followed was just as powerful as the noise had been. It was the kind of silence that demands attention, the kind that makes you hold your breath because you know something important is about to happen. Then there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads as they stood with lowered wings. Above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of lapis lazuli, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. The throne wasn't floating in empty space. It was positioned above everything else Ezekiel had seen. The creatures, the wheels, the expanse, all of it was beneath this throne. Everything in the vision was pointing upward to this one central reality. Ezekiel saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal, as if full of fire, and that from there down, he looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. The figure radiated light and heat and power. This wasn't a man sitting casually on a chair. This was glory itself, taking a form that human eyes could barely process. The glowing metal wasn't just bright, it was alive with fire. Like the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. Ezekiel couldn't describe what he saw directly. He had to use comparisons. It was like glowing metal. It was like fire. It was like a rainbow. Human language simply didn't have the words to capture the full reality of what he was witnessing. When Ezekiel saw this, he fell face down. There was no other possible response. You don't stand in the presence of that kind of glory. You don't remain upright when the Creator of the universe reveals himself. Ezekiel's face hit the ground, and he stayed there, completely overwhelmed by what he had just witnessed. Then he heard the voice of one speaking. The voice said to him, "Son of man, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you." As he spoke, the Spirit came into Ezekiel and raised him to his feet, and he heard him speaking to him. Ezekiel didn't stand up on his own. He couldn't. The Spirit had to come into him and lift him up. Only then, strengthened by divine power, could he stand before God and listen to what was about to be said. God said, "Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their ancestors have been in revolt against me to this very day. The people to whom I am sending you are obstinate and stubborn. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says." Right from the start, God was completely honest about the assignment. This wasn't going to be easy. The people Ezekiel would speak to weren't hungry for God's word. They weren't waiting eagerly for a prophet to show up. God continued speaking to Ezekiel with complete honesty about what lay ahead. And whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are a rebellious people, they will know that a prophet has been among them. And you, son of man, do not be afraid of them or their words. Do not be afraid, though briars and thorns are all around you and you live among scorpions. Do not be afraid of what they say or be terrified by them, though they are a rebellious people. The imagery was vivid and uncomfortable. Briars and thorns, plants that cut and scratch and draw blood, scorpions, creatures that hide and strike without warning, injecting venom that causes intense pain. This is what Ezekiel's ministry would feel like. The people would wound him with their words. They would attack him from hiding. And God was telling him this up front, not to discourage him, but to prepare him. You must speak my words to them, whether they listen or fail to listen, for they are rebellious. God then said to Ezekiel, But you, son of man, listen to what I say to you. Do not rebel like that rebellious people. Open your mouth and eat what I give you. Read. Then Ezekiel looked, and he saw a hand stretched out to him. In it was a scroll, which he unrolled before him. On both sides of it were written words of lament and mourning and woe. Normally, scrolls were only written on one side. The other side was left blank, but this scroll was so full of content that both sides were covered with writing. There was no empty space, no room for additions. The message was complete, and it was heavy. The words written on the scroll weren't promises of blessing or prosperity. They were words of lament, deep expressions of grief and sorrow. Words of mourning, the kind of words spoken at funerals and in times of great loss. Words of woe, pronouncements of judgment and disaster. God said to him, Son of man, eat what is before you, eat this scroll, then go and speak to the people of Israel. The command was strange, but the meaning was clear. Ezekiel couldn't just read this message and repeat it mechanically. He had to consume it. He had to make it part of himself. He had to let these words enter his body, fill his stomach, and become as much a part of him as the food he ate for physical survival. So Ezekiel opened his mouth, and God gave him the scroll to eat. Then he told him, Son of man, eat this scroll I'm giving you, and fill your stomach with it. So Ezekiel ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey in his mouth. This was the surprise. The scroll was full of lament, mourning, and woe. Anyone would expect it to taste bitter. But when Ezekiel ate it, the taste was sweet as honey. This showed something profound about God's word. Even when the message is hard, even when it contains judgment and difficult truths, receiving it and being entrusted with it is a privilege. God's word is always good, always right, always exactly what's needed, even when it's not what people want to hear. The sweetness Ezekiel tasted wasn't about the content of the message. It was about the honor of being chosen to deliver it. God continued, Son of man, go now to the people of Israel and speak my words to them. You are not being sent to a people of obscure speech and strange language, but to the people of Israel, not to many peoples of obscure speech and strange language, whose words you cannot understand. Surely, if I had sent you to them, they would have listened to you. But the people of Israel are not willing to listen to you, because they are not willing to listen to me, for all the Israelites are hardened and obstinate. Then God said something that would strengthen Ezekiel for the battles ahead. But I will make you as unyielding and hardened as they are. I will make your forehead like the hardest stone, harder than flint. Do not be afraid of them or terrified by them, though they are a rebellious people. God wasn't finished with his instructions. He told Ezekiel, Son of man, listen carefully and take to heart all the words I speak to you. Go now to your people in exile and speak to them. Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, whether they listen or fail to listen. The emphasis was clear. Listen carefully, take it to heart, speak the words exactly as given. Then the Spirit lifted Ezekiel up, and he heard behind him a loud rumbling sound as the glory of the Lord rose from the place where it was standing. It was the sound of the wings of the living creatures brushing against each other, and the sound of the wheels beside them, a loud, rumbling sound. The Spirit then lifted him up and took him away, and he went in bitterness and in the anger of his spirit, with the strong hand of the Lord on him. Ezekiel came to the exiles who lived at Tel Abib, near the Kabar River, and there, where they were living, he sat among them for 7 days, overwhelmed. He didn't immediately start preaching. He sat, he processed. He let the weight of everything he had seen and heard settle on him. At the end of 7 days, the word of the Lord came to him. Son of man, I have made you a watchman for the people of Israel. So hear the word I speak and give them warning from me. This was Ezekiel's specific role. He was a watchman, someone stationed on the wall to look for approaching danger and sound the alarm. When I say to a wicked person, you will surely die, and you do not warn them or speak out to dissuade them from their evil ways in order to save their life, that wicked person will die for their sin, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. But if you do warn the wicked person, and they do not turn from their wickedness or from their evil ways, they will die for their sin, but you will have saved yourself. God continued with another scenario. Again, when a righteous person turns from their righteousness and does evil, and I put a stumbling block before them, they will die. Since you did not warn them, they will die for their sin. The righteous things that person did will not be remembered, and I will hold you accountable for their blood. But if you do warn the righteous person not to sin, and they do not sin, they will surely live because they took warning, and you will have saved yourself. This was the weight placed on Ezekiel. He was a watchman, responsible for sounding the alarm. The hand of the Lord was on Ezekiel there, and God said to him, "Get up and go out to the plain, and there I will speak to you." So Ezekiel got up and went out to the plain, and the glory of the Lord was standing there, like the glory he had seen by the Kebar River, and he fell face down once again. Then the Spirit came into him and raised him to his feet. God spoke to him and said, "Go, shut yourself inside your house. And you, son of man, they will tie with ropes so that you cannot go out among the people. I will make your tongue stick to the roof of your mouth so that you will be silent and unable to rebuke them, for they are a rebellious people. But when I speak to you, I will open your mouth and you shall say to them, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says.' Whoever will listen, let them listen, and whoever will refuse, let them refuse, for they are a rebellious people." This was an unusual command. Ezekiel was to go into his house and stay there. The people would tie him with ropes, preventing him from moving freely among them. On top of being physically bound, Ezekiel would be struck mute. His tongue would stick to the roof of his mouth, rendering him completely silent. Ezekiel's silence wouldn't be permanent. God would open his mouth at specific times to deliver specific messages. The rest of the time, he would remain silent. This was a profound sign to the people. His entire life had become a message. God spoke to Ezekiel with a strange command. "Now, son of man, take a block of clay, put it in front of you and draw the city of Jerusalem on it." Ezekiel took the clay tablet and carefully etched the outline of Jerusalem onto its surface. Every wall, every gate, every major building, he drew it all so anyone looking at it would recognize the city immediately. Then God continued with more specific instructions. "Then lay siege to it. Erect siege works against it, build a ramp up to it, set up camps against it, and put battering rams around it." Ezekiel began constructing a miniature siege scene around his clay tablet. He built tiny siege ramps leading up to the walls. He placed small camps around the city. He positioned miniature battering rams at strategic points. The whole setup looked like a military commander's planning table before a major assault. God wasn't finished. "Then take an iron pan, place it as an iron wall between you and the city, and turn your face toward it. It will be under siege, and you shall besiege it. This will be a sign to the people of Israel." Ezekiel took the iron pan and set it up like a wall between himself and the clay city. Then he turned his face toward Jerusalem, staring at it with the intensity of a general planning an attack. The iron pan represented the unbreakable barrier that now stood between God and his people because of their sin. This wasn't just an art project. This was a living demonstration that would play out in front of the exiles day after day. Every person who walked by Ezekiel's house would see this siege scene. They would see him besieged. The city they still hoped would stand forever was going to be surrounded by enemy armies. The demonstration wasn't over. God gave Ezekiel an even more difficult command. Then lie on your left side and put the sin of the people of Israel upon yourself. You are to bear their sin for the number of days you lie on your side. I have assigned you the same number of days as the years of their sin. So for 390 days you will bear the sin of the people of Israel. 390 days. That's over a year. Ezekiel was commanded to lie on his left side for 390 consecutive days, bearing the sin of Israel, 1 day for each year of their rebellion. He couldn't just lie down for a few hours and call it done. This was a continuous demonstration that would last more than a year. God continued, "After you have finished this, lie down again, this time on your right side, and bear the sin of the people of Judah. I have assigned you 40 days, a day for each year." After the 390 days on his left side, Ezekiel would have to lie on his right side for 40 more days. That brought the total to 430 days, well over a year of lying on his side, unable to move freely. Then God added something that made this even more difficult. "I will tie you up with ropes so that you cannot turn from one side to the other until you have finished the days of your siege." Ezekiel wouldn't even be able to roll over when his body ached. He wouldn't be able to shift positions when lying on one side became unbearable. God would bind him with ropes, keeping him locked in position until the assigned time was complete. Imagine lying on your side for over a year. Your muscles would cramp. Your joints would ache. Sores would develop from the constant pressure. Every day would be physical agony. But this was the point. Ezekiel's physical suffering would represent Israel's spiritual condition. His bound, immobile state would show how sin had trapped the nation, leaving them unable to move or escape the consequences coming their way. While Ezekiel lay on his side, God gave him instructions about food and water. "Take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt. Put them in a storage jar and use them to make bread for yourself. You are to eat it during the 390 days you lie on your side." This mixture of grains wasn't typical. People didn't normally combine all these ingredients. But during a siege, you eat whatever you have. You mix whatever grains are left because you can't afford to be picky. God specified the exact amount. Weigh out 20 shekels of food to eat each day and eat it at set times. 20 shekels was about 8 ounces, roughly half a pound of food per day. That's not much. It's barely enough to keep someone alive. A normal person eats 3 to 4 times that amount daily. But during a siege, food runs out. Rations get smaller and smaller until people are surviving on amounts that would have seemed impossible before. The water ration was equally severe. Also, measure out 1/6 of a hin of water and drink it at set times. 1/6 of a hin was about 2/3 of a quart, roughly 20 ounces of water per day. In the hot Middle Eastern climate, that's nowhere near enough for comfort. It's just enough to prevent death from dehydration. People living through the siege would know constant thirst, always wanting more water, but having to make their small ration last until the next distribution. Then God added the most disturbing part of the command. Eat the food as you would a loaf of barley bread. Bake it in the sight of the people, using human excrement for fuel. Human waste as cooking fuel. This was shocking, disgusting, and completely unclean according to Jewish law. But God was making a point about how desperate things would become during the siege. When firewood runs out, people burn whatever they can find. The defilement that would come upon Jerusalem would be total. Ezekiel couldn't accept this part silently. He responded, "Not so, sovereign Lord. I have never defiled myself. From my youth until now I have never eaten anything found dead or torn by wild animals. No impure meat has ever entered my mouth." As a priest, Ezekiel had been scrupulous about remaining ceremonially clean his entire life. The thought of defiling himself this way was too much. God listened and adjusted the command. "Very well, I will let you bake your bread over cow dung instead of human excrement." Cow dung was still unpleasant, but it wasn't as defiling as human waste. God showed mercy in this detail, but the larger point remained. Jerusalem would experience defilement, scarcity, and desperation beyond anything the people could currently imagine. God explained why this demonstration mattered. "Son of man, I am about to cut off the food supply in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair, for food and water will be scarce. They will be appalled at the sight of each other and will waste away because of their sin. The siege would bring starvation, dehydration, and the slow wasting of bodies. Parents would watch their children grow thin, the strong would become weak, and everyone would waste away while trapped inside the city walls." After commanding Ezekiel about the siege demonstration and the lying on his side, God gave him another visual sign to perform. "Now, son of man, take a sharp sword and use it as a barber's razor to shave your head and your beard. Then take a set of scales and divide up the hair." A sharp sword used as a razor. The imagery itself was violent. Swords weren't meant for grooming, they were meant for killing, but Ezekiel was to use a sword to shave his head and beard completely. For a Jewish man, especially a priest, shaving the head and beard was a sign of mourning and shame. Hair represented dignity and honor. To remove it all was to declare that something terrible had happened, and Ezekiel wasn't just cutting his hair, he was shaving it completely off with a weapon of war. God continued with specific instructions about what to do with the hair. "When the days of your siege come to an end, burn a third of the hair inside the city. Take a third and strike it with the sword all around the city, and scatter a third to the wind, for I will pursue them with drawn sword." 3 equal portions, 3 different fates. Each portion represented what would happen to the people of Jerusalem. The first third would be burned inside the city. This represented those who would die during the siege itself, from famine, disease, and the fires that would rage through Jerusalem when the Babylonians broke through. They would perish inside the walls, unable to escape. The second third would be struck with the sword around the city. This represented those who would die trying to flee or fight. They would make it outside the walls, but the Babylonian army would cut them down. The sword would find them in the open, and they would fall just outside the city they had tried to defend or escape. The third portion would be scattered to the wind. This represented the exile and dispersion that would follow Jerusalem's fall. The people would be scattered across nations, blown in every direction like hair in the wind. And even then, God would pursue them with his drawn sword. Even in exile, judgment would follow. But God added one more detail to the hair demonstration. "But take a few hairs and tuck them away in the folds of your garment." Out of all the hair that would be burned, struck with the sword and scattered, Ezekiel was to take just a few strands and preserve them. These few strands represented the remnant, the small group that would survive the complete destruction. This was the first hint of hope in all these dark demonstrations. Not everyone would be destroyed. A few would be preserved, tucked away safely in the folds of God's garment. They would survive the fire, escape the sword, and endure the scattering. This small remnant would carry on the story of Israel, but even this remnant wasn't completely safe. God continued, "Again, take a few of these and throw them into the fire and burn them up. A fire will spread from there to all Israel. Even among the preserved remnant, some would face further judgment. Even those who escaped the initial destruction would experience tribulation. The fire that consumed Jerusalem wouldn't be contained. It would spread and affect even those who had been set aside. This showed the thoroughness of God's judgment. It wasn't enough to escape Jerusalem. It wasn't enough to survive the siege. The consequences of Israel's sin would reach into the exile itself. The remnant would be preserved, but they wouldn't be comfortable. They would carry the weight of what happened and face continued challenges in foreign lands. God directed Ezekiel to prophesy against the geography itself. Son of man, set your face against the mountains of Israel, prophesy against them and say, You mountains of Israel, hear the word of the sovereign Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to the mountains and hills, to the ravines and valleys. I am about to bring a sword against you, and I will destroy your high places. The mountains of Israel weren't just landscape features. They were the locations where Israel had built altars to foreign gods. On every high hill, under every spreading tree, the people had set up places of worship to idols. They had taken the beautiful land God gave them and covered it with monuments to false gods. The mountains had witnessed Israel's unfaithfulness for generations. God continued describing what would happen to these places. Your altars will be demolished, and your incense altars will be smashed, and I will slay your people in front of your idols. I will lay the dead bodies of the Israelites in front of their idols, and I will scatter your bones around your altars. The idols wouldn't save anyone. The people who bowed down to them would die right in front of them. Their bodies would fall at the feet of the gods they had trusted, proving once and for all that these idols had no power to protect or deliver. The destruction would be comprehensive. Wherever you live, the towns will be laid waste, and the high places demolished, so that your altars will be laid waste and devastated, your idols smashed and ruined, your incense altars broken down, and what you have made wiped out. Nothing would remain. Every town, every altar, every idol, every incense altar, all of it would be destroyed. Future generations would walk through these places and find only ruins, but the destruction had a purpose. Your people will fall slain among you, and you will know that I am the Lord. This wasn't random violence. This wasn't divine cruelty. This was correction. This was God breaking through centuries of stubbornness to make one point absolutely clear. I am the Lord, not the idols, not the foreign gods, not the altars on the high places, me. God acknowledged that some would survive and remember. But I will spare some, for some of you will escape the sword when you are scattered among the lands and nations. Then in the nations where they have been carried captive, those who escape will remember me, how I have been grieved by their adulterous hearts, which have turned away from me, and by their eyes, which have lusted after their idols. The survivors would finally understand. They would remember God and realize how deeply their idolatry had wounded him. The remembering would bring regret. They will loathe themselves for the evil they have done and for all their detestable practices. And they will know that I am the Lord, and that I did not threaten in vain to bring this calamity on them. Self-loathing would replace their former pride. They would look back at their idolatry and feel disgusted with themselves. And they would know without question that God's warnings had been real, not empty threats. God commanded Ezekiel to make a dramatic physical demonstration. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Strike your hands together and stamp your feet and cry out, Alas, because of all the wicked and detestable practices of the people of Israel, for they will fall by the sword, famine, and plague. Ezekiel was to clap his hands together, stamp his feet on the ground, and shout out in grief. These were gestures of extreme emotion. Horror, grief, and lament, all expressed through vigorous physical movement. The clapping wasn't celebration. It was the sharp sound of divine judgment being declared. The stamping wasn't dancing. It was the emphatic declaration that something terrible was coming, and there was no way to stop it. And the cry of alas was the sound of grief over what was about to happen to Israel. God explained the threefold judgment that would come. Those who are far away will die of the plague, and those who are near will fall by the sword, and those who survive and are spared will die of famine. So will I pour out my wrath on them. No one would escape. Distance wouldn't save you. Plague would find you there. Proximity wouldn't save you. The sword would cut you down. And if you somehow survived both plague and sword, famine would finish what they started. God described the totality of what was coming. Then you will know that I am the Lord, when their people lie slain among their idols around their altars, on every high hill and on all the mountain tops, under every spreading tree and every leafy oak, places where they offered fragrant incense to all their idols. Every location where Israel had worshipped false gods would become a graveyard. The places they thought were holy would be filled with corpses. The judgment would be inescapable. And I will stretch out my hand against them and make the land a desolate waste from the desert to Diblah, wherever they live. Then they will know that I am the Lord. From one end of the land to the other, from the southern desert to the northern border, everything would become desolate. The fertile land would become wasteland. The productive fields would lie empty. The cities would be ruins. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel again. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says to the land of Israel. The end has come upon the four corners of the land. Not just trouble, not just difficulty, the end, complete, final, total end. It was coming to every part of the land, north, south, east, and west. No region would be spared. God declared the finality of what was approaching. The end is now upon you, and I will unleash my anger against you. I will judge you according to your conduct and repay you for all your detestable practices. This wasn't a warning about something that might happen if they didn't change. This was an announcement that the time for change had passed. The end was now upon them. Judgment was no longer future. It was present, arriving, unavoidable. God emphasized that there would be no mercy in this moment. I will not look on you with pity. I will not spare you. I surely will repay you for your conduct and for the detestable practices among you. Then you will know that I am the Lord. The pity that had delayed judgment for so long was exhausted. The patience that had given chance after chance was finished. Now would come the full payment for everything Israel had done. The announcement was repeated for emphasis. This is what the sovereign Lord says, disaster, unheard of disaster. See, it comes. An unprecedented disaster, something Israel had never experienced before, something that would make all previous troubles look small by comparison. And it wasn't coming someday. It was coming now. See, it comes. God painted the picture of complete social collapse. The end has come, the end has come, it has roused itself against you. See, it comes. Doom has come upon you who dwell in the land. The time has come, the day is near. There is panic, not joy on the mountains. The mountains that had been places of idolatrous worship would now echo with screams of panic. The high places where people had felt safe and powerful would become places of terror. The judgment would be swift and comprehensive. I am about to pour out my wrath on you and spend my anger against you. I will judge you according to your conduct and repay you for all your detestable practices. I will not look on you with pity. I will not spare you. I will repay you for your conduct and for the detestable practices among you. Then you will know that it is I, the Lord, who strikes you. When the disaster came, there would be no question about its source. Everyone would know that this was the Lord's doing. This was divine judgment, not just bad luck or unfortunate circumstances. God described the economic collapse that would accompany the military disaster. See the day, see it comes. Doom has burst forth, the rod has budded, arrogance has blossomed, violence has arisen, a rod to punish the wicked. None of the people will be left, none of that crowd, none of their wealth, nothing of value. All the wealth, all the prosperity, all the material success that had made Israel proud, it would all disappear. The economy would collapse. Wealth would become worthless. Nothing of value would remain. The normal patterns of commerce would cease. The time has come. The day has arrived. Let not the buyer rejoice, nor the seller grieve, for my wrath is on the whole crowd. The seller will not recover the property that was sold, as long as both buyer and seller live. For the vision concerning the whole crowd will not be reversed. Because of their sins, not one of them will preserve their life. In normal times, sellers grieve when they have to sell property, and buyers rejoice when they acquire it. But when total destruction is coming, these transactions become meaningless. Why rejoice over property you're about to lose? Why grieve over property you won't live to miss? In the 6th year of exile, in the 6th month on the 5th day, Ezekiel was sitting in his house with the elders of Judah sitting before him. Suddenly, the hand of the sovereign Lord came on him there. He looked up and saw a figure whose appearance was like that of a man. From what appeared to be his waist down, he was like fire, and from there up his appearance was as bright as glowing metal. The figure stretched out what looked like a hand and took Ezekiel by the hair of his head. The Spirit lifted him up between earth and heaven, and in visions of God he took him to Jerusalem, to the entrance of the north gate of the inner court, where the idol that provokes to jealousy stood. This wasn't a physical journey. Ezekiel's body remained in Babylon, sitting in his house with the elders, but in the vision he was transported hundreds of miles away to Jerusalem, specifically to the temple complex. The location was significant, the entrance of the north gate of the inner court. This was within the temple grounds, not outside in the city, and right there at the entrance stood an idol that provoked God to jealousy. The Hebrew people had placed an idol in God's own house, in the very place where his presence was supposed to dwell. It was like bringing another lover into your spouse's bedroom, and there before him was the glory of the God of Israel, as in the vision he had seen in the plain. The same glory Ezekiel had witnessed by the Kibar River, the same throne with the figure surrounded by fire and brilliant light. It was here in Jerusalem at the temple. But something was different about this appearance. The glory was present, but it wouldn't remain. What Ezekiel was about to witness would explain why. Then God said to Ezekiel, "Son of man, look toward the north." So he looked, and in the entrance north of the gate of the altar, he saw this idol of jealousy. God asked him, "Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The utterly detestable things the Israelites are doing here, things that will drive me far from my sanctuary? But you will see things that are even more detestable than an idol in the temple." Ezekiel was about to discover that the visible idolatry was just the surface. The real corruption was hidden, practiced in secret by the people who should have known better. Then God brought him to the entrance to the court. Ezekiel looked, and he saw a hole in the wall. God said to him, "Son of man, now dig into the wall." So Ezekiel dug into the wall and saw a doorway there. The hole was already present, but small. By enlarging it, Ezekiel could access what was beyond. God commanded, "Go in and see the wicked and detestable things they're doing here." So Ezekiel went in and looked, and he saw portrayed all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and all the idols of Israel. The walls were covered with engravings and paintings of creatures that were forbidden, animals that were unclean according to the law, and idols representing false gods. This was a hidden shrine, a secret room where forbidden worship took place. In front of them stood 70 elders of Israel, and Jazaniah son of Shaphan was standing among them. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. These weren't random citizens. These were the leaders, 70 elders, men who held positions of authority and respect. And among them was Jazaniah son of Shaphan. The Shaphan family had a history of faithfulness to God, but here was one of their descendants participating in this secret idolatry. God said to Ezekiel, "Son of man, have you seen what the elders of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? They say, 'The Lord does not see us, the Lord has forsaken the land.'" This was the justification they gave themselves. They believed God had abandoned them, so they felt free to worship other gods. They thought the darkness would hide them, that their secret room would keep their actions concealed, but nothing is hidden from God. God added, "Again, you will see them doing things that are even more detestable." The tour of abominations wasn't finished. There were deeper levels of corruption still to be revealed. Then God brought Ezekiel to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and he saw women sitting there, mourning the god Tammuz. This was a completely different kind of idolatry from what he had just witnessed. Instead of hidden worship in darkness, this was out in the open, right at the gate of the temple. Tammuz was a Babylonian fertility god, part of a mythology about death and rebirth, tied to agricultural cycles. The worship of Tammuz involved ritual weeping and mourning, supposedly to bring about his resurrection and ensure fertile crops. Women would sit and wail, tears streaming down their faces, grieving for a god who had never lived and could never die because he had never truly existed. The location made this especially offensive. This wasn't happening in a distant village or a private home. This was at the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, the temple itself. Women were sitting at God's doorstep, weeping for a foreign god. They had imported Babylonian religious practices and were performing them at the entrance to the place where Israel's God was supposed to be honored exclusively. God asked Ezekiel, "Do you see this, Son of Man?" It was a rhetorical question, demanding that Ezekiel take in the full weight of what he was witnessing. The question forced him to confront the reality. This was actually happening in Jerusalem, at the temple among God's people. Then God added, "You will see things that are even more detestable than this." Each revelation had been worse than the last. The idol at the gate had been bad. The secret room with the elders had been worse. The women weeping for Tammuz had been more detestable still. But there was one more level of abomination to witness. God brought Ezekiel into the inner court of the house of the Lord, and there at the entrance to the temple, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men. This location was the most sacred area of the temple complex. The space between the portico and the altar was where priests would normally stand to minister before God. It was the closest point to the holy place that regular priests could access. With their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east, they were bowing down to the sun in the east. The physical positioning told the whole story. They had literally turned their backs on the temple, on God's dwelling place, and were facing east to worship the sun. They had reversed the proper orientation entirely. Instead of facing the temple and honoring the God who created the sun, they were facing the sun itself and worshiping creation rather than the Creator. God asked Ezekiel, "Have you seen this, Son of Man? Is it a trivial matter for the people of Judah to do the detestable things they are doing here?" The question challenged any attempt to minimize what was happening. This wasn't a minor offense. This wasn't cultural misunderstanding. This was complete betrayal, practiced by religious leaders in the most sacred space. God continued describing the fullness of their rebellion. "Must they also fill the land with violence and continually arouse my anger? Look at them putting the branch to their nose." The idolatry wasn't happening in isolation. Violence had filled the land, and they were performing some gesture, putting the branch to their nose, that held offensive meaning, though the exact significance is now lost to history. What matters is that it was one more provocative act added to their pile of offenses. God declared the consequence. Therefore I will deal with them in anger. I will not look on them with pity or spare them. Although they shout in my ears, I will not listen to them. The time for mercy had passed. When judgment finally came, their prayers would be too late. God would not listen, not because he couldn't hear, but because they had ignored him for so long that now he would respond in kind. Then Ezekiel heard God call out in a loud voice, "Bring near those who are appointed to execute judgment on the city, each with a weapon in his hand." 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with a deadly weapon in his hand. They were executioners, divine agents called to carry out judgment on Jerusalem. Each one carried a weapon designed to kill. With them was a man clothed in linen who had a writing kit at his side. This 7th figure was different from the 6 executioners. His clothing identified him as having a priestly or administrative function, and the writing kit indicated he had a recording or marking duty. He wasn't there to kill, he was there to mark. They came in and stood beside the bronze altar. The bronze altar stood in the temple courtyard, the place where sacrifices had been offered for generations. Now these figures stood beside it, preparing for a different kind of sacrifice, the sacrifice of Jerusalem's inhabitants who had turned away from God. Now the glory of the God of Israel went up from above the cherubim where it had been and moved to the threshold of the temple. This was a significant movement. The glory had been positioned above the cherubim, the traditional place where God's presence rested in the most holy place. But now it was moving. It rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. This was the beginning of God's departure from the temple, a gradual withdrawal that would culminate in complete abandonment. The Lord called to the man clothed in linen who had the writing kit at his side. God was about to give him his specific assignment, a task that would determine who lived and who died in the coming judgment. God spoke to the man in linen and said, "Go throughout the city of Jerusalem and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it." The assignment was clear but specific. Not everyone would receive the mark. Only those who grieved and lamented over the abominations would be marked. This revealed something important about God's judgment. He distinguished between the guilty and the faithful. Even in a city full of idolatry and corruption, there were people who had remained faithful, who were grieved by what they saw around them, who lamented the betrayal of God happening in their streets and in their temple. These people would be marked and protected. The mark would be placed on their foreheads, visible, permanent, a sign that these individuals belonged to God and were under his protection. When the executioners went through the city, this mark would be the only thing standing between life and death. Without it, there would be no mercy. With it, there would be complete protection. The basis for receiving the mark wasn't outward religious activity or social status. It was internal grief over sin. The people who received the mark were those whose hearts broke over the idolatry surrounding them. They hadn't participated in the abominations. They hadn't compromised. They hadn't shrugged and gone along with everyone else. Instead, they had grieved. Their spirits had been wounded by watching God's name dishonored and his temple defiled. As Ezekiel listened, God spoke to the 6 executioners. "Follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter the old men, the young men and women, the mothers and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. Begin at my sanctuary." The command was absolute and comprehensive. Age wouldn't save you, gender wouldn't save you, being a mother or a child wouldn't save you. The only thing that would save you was the mark. The instruction to begin at the sanctuary was significant. Judgment would start at God's own house with the people who should have known better, who had greater responsibility and greater access to God's truth. The elders who burned incense in the secret room, the women who wept for Tammuz, the men who worshipped the sun, they would be first. So they began with the old men who were in front of the temple. The 70 elders who had been burning incense to idols in their secret chambers were struck down. The leaders who had led the people astray, who had practiced their abominations in darkness while claiming that God couldn't see them, they were the first to fall. Then God said to the executioners, "Defile the temple and fill the courts with the slain. Go." So they went out and began killing throughout the city. The temple courts, which should have been holy, would be filled with dead bodies. The defilement that Israel had brought into the temple through their idolatry would now be completed by the physical defilement of corpses. What the people had defiled spiritually would be defiled physically. While they were killing and Ezekiel was left alone, he fell face down, crying out, "Alas, sovereign Lord, are you going to destroy the entire remnant of Israel in this outpouring of your wrath on Jerusalem?" The scene was so overwhelming that Ezekiel couldn't remain standing. He collapsed and cried out to God, questioning whether anyone would survive this judgment. God answered him, "The sin of the people of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. The land is full of bloodshed, and the city is full of injustice. They say, 'The Lord has forsaken the land. The Lord does not see.' So I will not look on them with pity or spare them, but I will bring down on their own heads what they have done." God's response emphasized that this judgment was deserved. The people had filled the land with violence and injustice. They had convinced themselves that God wasn't watching. Now they would discover otherwise. Then the man in linen with the writing kit at his side brought back word saying, "I have done as you commanded." His task was complete. Everyone who grieved over the abominations had been marked. Now the slaughter could proceed with precision. Everyone without the mark would fall, and everyone with the mark would be protected. Ezekiel looked and saw the likeness of a throne of lapis lazuli above the vault that was over the heads of the cherubim. God spoke to the man clothed in linen and said, "Go in among the wheels beneath the cherubim. Fill your hands with burning coals from among the cherubim and scatter them over the city." And as Ezekiel watched, the man went in. The burning coals represented judgment falling on Jerusalem like fire from heaven. Now the cherubim were standing on the south side of the temple when the man went in, and a cloud filled the inner court. Then the glory of the Lord rose from above the cherubim and moved to the threshold of the temple. The cloud filled the temple, and the court was full of the radiance of the glory of the Lord. This was another stage in the departure. The glory had moved from above the cherubim to the threshold earlier. Now it was moving again, and the cloud that represented God's presence was filling spaces as if saying goodbye. The sound of the wings of the cherubim could be heard as far away as the outer court, like the voice of God Almighty when he speaks. When the Lord commanded the man in linen, "Take fire from among the wheels, from among the cherubim," the man went in and stood beside a wheel. Then one of the cherubim reached out his hand to the fire that was among them. He took up some of it and put it into the hands of the man in linen, who took it and went out. Under the wings of the cherubim could be seen what looked like human hands. Ezekiel looked, and he saw beside the cherubim 4 wheels, one beside each of the cherubim. The wheels sparkled like topaz. As for their appearance, the 4 of them looked alike. Each was like a wheel intersecting a wheel. These were the same wheels Ezekiel had seen in his first vision by the Kebar River. Then the cherubim rose upward. These were the living creatures Ezekiel had seen by the Kebar River. When the cherubim moved, the wheels beside them moved, and when the cherubim spread their wings to rise from the ground, the wheels did not leave their side. When the cherubim stood still, they also stood still, and when the cherubim rose, they rose with them, because the spirit of the living creatures was in them. Then the glory of the Lord departed from over the threshold of the temple and stopped above the cherubim. This was the critical moment. The glory that had dwelt in the temple since Solomon's dedication was leaving. While Ezekiel watched, the cherubim spread their wings and rose from the ground, and as they went, the wheels went with them. They stopped at the entrance of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the God of Israel was above them. The glory moved from the threshold to above the cherubim, then to the east gate. It was departing in stages, as if reluctant to leave completely, giving every possible chance for the people to repent and call it back. But no one was calling out. No one was repenting. So the departure continued. These were the living creatures Ezekiel had seen beneath the God of Israel by the Kibar River, and he realized that they were cherubim. Each had 4 faces and 4 wings, and under their wings was what looked like human hands. Their faces had the same appearance as those he had seen by the Kibar River. Each one went straight ahead. Ezekiel now understood fully what he had witnessed in his first vision. The throne vision wasn't just about God's glory in a general sense. It was mobile. God's presence wasn't trapped in the temple. It could leave, and now it was leaving. The hand of the Lord was on Ezekiel, and he carried him out by the Spirit of the Lord and set him in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. This wasn't a small cemetery or a battlefield with recent casualties. This was a vast valley. And everywhere Ezekiel looked, there were bones covering the ground. God led him back and forth among them, and Ezekiel saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. God wasn't just showing him the valley from a distance. He was making Ezekiel walk through it, step among the bones, see them up close. The bones weren't fresh. They were very dry, bleached by the sun, brittle with age. These people had been dead for a long time. The scene represented complete hopelessness. Bones meant death. Dry bones meant death long past any possibility of reversal. These weren't bodies that had just died. These weren't people who might be revived. These were skeletal remains that had been exposed to the elements for so long that every trace of moisture, every bit of tissue, every sign of life had disappeared. God asked Ezekiel, "Son of man, can these bones live?" It was an impossible question. Looking at the evidence, the answer was obviously no. Dead is dead. Dry bones don't come back to life. The very idea violated everything anyone understood about how the world worked. But Ezekiel had learned not to put limits on God. He answered, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." It was the perfect response. Ezekiel didn't say yes, which would have seemed presumptuous. He didn't say no, which would have limited God's power. He simply acknowledged that God knew possibilities that humans couldn't imagine. If these bones could live, it would be because God made it happen, not because it was naturally possible. Then God said to him, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, 'Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord.'" God was commanding Ezekiel to preach to a valley full of skeletons. It seemed absurd. Dead bones can't hear, they can't respond, they can't do anything. But God's command wasn't based on what seemed reasonable. It was based on his power to do the impossible. God told Ezekiel what to say to the bones. "This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord." This was the prophecy Ezekiel was to speak, a promise that these dry bones would become living people again through a process that reversed death itself. So Ezekiel prophesied as he was commanded. He stood in that valley and spoke God's words to the bones scattered across the ground. And as he was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound. Something was happening. The bones were responding to the word of God. The bones came together, bone to bone. Across the valley, skeletal parts began moving toward each other. Leg bones connected to hip bones, arm bones attached to shoulder bones, spines assembled vertebra by vertebra. Skulls found their proper places atop spinal columns. It was like watching death run backward, like seeing a film of decay played in reverse. Ezekiel looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. The bones had connected. The skeletal structures had formed complete human shapes. Then tissue began growing over the bones, tendons attaching, muscles forming, flesh covering everything. Finally, skin stretched over it all, creating what looked like human bodies. But they weren't alive. They looked like people, complete and whole in every physical detail. But they lay motionless on the ground. They had form, but no life. They had bodies, but no breath. They were like perfect sculptures, or like people in a deep sleep from which they couldn't wake. The transformation was remarkable, but it wasn't complete. Something essential was still missing. Then God said to Ezekiel, "Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the Sovereign Lord says. Come, breath, from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." Now Ezekiel had to prophesy to the breath itself, calling it from the four winds, from north, south, east, and west, summoning it to enter these lifeless bodies. So Ezekiel prophesied as God commanded him, and breath entered them. The moment the breath came into the bodies, they came to life and stood up on their feet. A vast army. It wasn't a gradual process. They didn't slowly wake up or struggle to their feet. The breath entered, and immediately they lived. They opened their eyes. They drew their first breaths. They stood up, thousands upon thousands of them, covering the valley floor where moments before there had been only dry bones. They stood as a vast army, organized, complete, ready. What had been a picture of total death and hopelessness had become a picture of overwhelming life and strength. The valley that had represented the end of everything now represented a new beginning, a resurrection that defied all natural law. Then God explained the vision to Ezekiel. "Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, 'Our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off.'" This was how Israel felt in exile. They saw themselves as dead, as finished, as having no future. Their nation had been destroyed, their city had fallen, their temple was gone. They had been scattered among foreign peoples. In their minds, they were as good as dead, dried bones with no possibility of restoration. God continued, "Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the Sovereign Lord says, my people, I'm going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel." The vision wasn't just about physical resurrection, it was about national restoration. God was promising to bring Israel back from what seemed like death. He would restore them to their land, reverse their exile, and give them a future when they thought all hope was lost. "Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord." The promise had two parts. God would bring them back physically to their land, and He would put His Spirit in them, giving them spiritual life, not just physical restoration. This wasn't just about returning to geography. It was about being made alive in relationship with God again. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel again with another demonstration. "Son of man, take a stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Judah and the Israelites associated with him. Then take another stick of wood and write on it, belonging to Joseph, that is, to Ephraim, and all the Israelites associated with him." God was asking Ezekiel to label two sticks representing the two kingdoms that Israel had become after Solomon's death. The southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel, often called Ephraim after its dominant tribe. God continued, "Join them together into one stick so that they will become one in your hand." Ezekiel was to physically connect the two sticks so they appeared as a single piece. This was another visual demonstration, something the people could see and touch, making the prophecy concrete and memorable. God explained what to do when people asked about the meaning. "When your people ask you, Won't you tell us what you mean by this? Say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am going to take the stick of Joseph, which is in Ephraim's hand, and of the Israelite tribes associated with him, and join it to Judah's stick. I will make them into a single stick of wood, and they will become one in my hand. The interpretation was straightforward. God would reunify the divided kingdom, bringing the northern and southern tribes back together as one nation. God told Ezekiel to hold the sticks before the people's eyes and explain further. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will take the Israelites out of the nations where they have gone. I will gather them from all around and bring them back into their own land. I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. There will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. The division that had weakened Israel for centuries would be erased. The political rivalry, the separate identities, the conflict between North and South, all of it would end. They would be one people again, under one king, in one land. The broken stick would become whole. God continued describing the restored nation. They will no longer defile themselves with their idols and vile images, or with any of their offenses, for I will save them from all their sinful backsliding, and I will cleanse them. They will be my people, and I will be their God. The restoration wouldn't just be political, it would be spiritual. The idolatry that had caused the exile in the first place would be gone. God would cleanse them from their sin. My servant David will be king over them, and they will all have one shepherd. They will follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees. This was a remarkable promise. David had been dead for centuries by Ezekiel's time. God wasn't promising that the historical David would somehow come back to life. He was promising that a descendant of David, someone from his royal line, would rule over the restored Israel. This king would be like David, a shepherd king who followed God's heart. They will live in the land I gave to my servant Jacob, the land where your ancestors lived. They and their children and their children's children will live there forever, and David my servant will be their prince forever. The promise extended through generations. This wasn't just about the immediate return from exile. This was about a permanent restoration, a forever kingdom with a forever prince from David's line. God then spoke of a covenant. I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever. This covenant would be different from the old one that Israel had broken. It would be everlasting, unbreakable, bringing permanent peace between God and his people. My dwelling place will be with them. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Then the nations will know that I, the Lord, make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever. God's presence would return and remain permanently. The departure of glory that Ezekiel had witnessed in his vision would be reversed. God would dwell among his people forever, and this permanent presence would demonstrate to all nations that Israel belonged to the Lord. The word of the Lord came to Ezekiel with a prophecy about events in the distant future. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Prophesy against him and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. This was a prophecy about an enemy who would come against restored Israel, a figure named Gog from the land of Magog. God described how he would bring Gog against Israel. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Gog wouldn't come of his own decision alone. God would bring him, turning his plans to serve divine purposes. His army would be massive, fully equipped for war. God described Gog's forces in detail. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets, also Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. This would be a coalition of nations from various directions, all united under Gog's leadership, creating an overwhelming military force. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days, you will be called to arms. In future years, you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. The invasion would come after Israel had been restored and was living peacefully, making the attack a violation of a people who had finally found rest. God explained Gog's motivation. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. On that day thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. Gog would see Israel's peace and lack of defenses as an opportunity. He would plan to plunder a vulnerable nation. But God had his own plan. This is what the Sovereign Lord says. In that day, when my people Israel are living in safety, will you not take notice of it? You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, Gog, I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. God described what would happen when Gog attacked. This is what will happen in that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the Sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. God's response to Gog's invasion would be immediate and overwhelming. The earth itself would shake with divine fury. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. All creation would react to God's intervention. The natural order would be disrupted by divine power defending Israel. God continued describing Gog's destruction. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the Sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him, and on his troops, and on the many nations with him. Gog's army would turn on itself in confusion. Then natural disasters, plague, torrential rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur would complete their destruction. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Gog's defeat would serve a larger purpose, demonstrating God's power to all nations, making his reality undeniable. In the 25th year of the exile, at the beginning of the year, on the 10th day of the month, in the 14th year after the fall of the city, on that very day, the hand of the Lord was on Ezekiel, and he took him there. In visions of God, he took him to the land of Israel and set him on a very high mountain, on whose south side were some buildings that looked like a city. God took him there, and Ezekiel saw a man whose appearance was like bronze. He was standing in the gateway with a linen cord and a measuring rod in his hand. This figure would be Ezekiel's guide through the vision, measuring every detail of what was to come and explaining it to him. The man said to Ezekiel, "Son of man, look carefully and listen closely and pay attention to everything I'm going to show you, for that is why you have been brought here. Tell the people of Israel everything you see. This wasn't casual sightseeing. Ezekiel needed to pay close attention to every detail because he would need to report it all back to the people. The man began measuring the east gate. He measured the threshold of the gateway. It was 1 rod deep. The alcoves for the guards were 1 rod long and 1 rod wide, and the projecting walls between the alcoves were 5 cubits thick. And the threshold of the gate next to the portico facing the temple was 1 rod deep. Every measurement was precise, specific, creating a picture of exact dimensions. The guide measured the portico of the gateway. It was 8 cubits deep, and its jambs were 2 cubits thick. The portico of the gateway faced the temple. Inside the east gate were 3 alcoves on each side. The 3 had the same measurements, and the faces of the projecting walls on each side had the same measurements. The symmetry and precision continued throughout. Then, the guide measured the width of the entrance of the gateway. It was 10 cubits, and its length was 13 cubits. In front of each alcove was a wall 1 cubit high, and the alcoves were 6 cubits square. Then he measured the gateway from the top of the rear wall of one alcove to the top of the opposite one. The distance was 25 cubits from one parapet opening to the opposite one. He measured along the faces of the projecting walls all around the inside of the gateway, 60 cubits. The measurement was up to the portico facing the courtyard. The distance from the entrance of the gateway to the far end of its portico was 50 cubits. The alcoves and the projecting walls inside the gateway were surmounted by narrow parapet openings all around, as was the portico. The openings all around faced inward. The faces of the projecting walls were decorated with palm tree designs. The measurements continued as the guide showed Ezekiel the outer court, the inner court, the rooms for the priests, and finally the temple building itself. Every dimension was recorded: the width of walls, the length of rooms, the height of doorways, the size of windows. Nothing was left to approximation. This temple was designed with divine precision. Every measurement specified exactly. Then the man brought Ezekiel to the gate facing east, and he saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the return of the glory that had departed. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The sound and light that had accompanied the glory in every previous vision were present again. The vision Ezekiel saw was like the vision he had seen when God came to destroy the city, and like the visions he had seen by the Kibar River, and he fell face down. Ezekiel recognized the glory immediately. It was the same presence he had witnessed in his calling, the same glory he had seen departing from the temple, and as before, he could do nothing but fall face down before it. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. The glory was returning the same way it had left. The east gate that had been the exit point for God's presence when it departed was now the entrance point for its return. What had left was coming back. Then the Spirit lifted Ezekiel up and brought him into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. The temple that had been empty, the space that had been abandoned, was now filled again with divine presence. God was returning to dwell with his people in this new temple. While the man was standing beside Ezekiel, he heard someone speaking to him from inside the temple. The voice said, "Son of man, this is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever." This was the declaration Ezekiel and all of Israel needed to hear. God was claiming this place as his dwelling. He was committing to live among them forever. The people of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death. When they placed their threshold next to my threshold and their doorposts beside my doorposts, with only a wall between me and them, they defiled my holy name by their detestable practices. So I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings, and I will live among them forever." God commanded Ezekiel, "Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their sins. Let them consider its perfection, and if they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement, its exits and entrances, its whole design and all its regulations and laws. Write these down before them, so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all its regulations." This was why Ezekiel had been shown everything in such detail. He was to tell the people exactly what he had seen, so they would understand God's plan for restoration. The vision ended with God's presence filling the temple, the ultimate promise that what had been lost would be restored, and what had departed would return. If this journey through Ezekiel has opened your eyes to prophecy in a new way, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss our next deep dive into Scripture. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that God can breathe life into the driest bones, that He sees when we grieve over sin, and that His glory will return. The story of Ezekiel